Myst, Might, Mayhem. By Han Jung-Wioya. Chapter 391. Crossroads. Part 1. Young Master Na Yelriang downed a full cup of alcohol. As he emptied the cup and was about to pour another, Mo Yak clicked his tongue and said, "Why are you pouring drinks alone so pathetically?" "It's because you're not drinking with me. Aish. You never used to drink, but after your seclusion." No, to be precise, ever since he received that strange eye transplant surgery that the Elder Council had provided, he had been drinking constantly. This had been increasingly bothering Mo Yak for some time. He had been holding his tongue since this was his lord, but could it really be considered an eye transplant when the eye was originally lost? Any skilled physician would say that once an eye is lost, that's the end of it. Even if you brought someone else's eye, with current medical techniques, it's impossible to connect the optic nerve. Yet the physician brought by that envoy from the Elder Council had done this easily. But why didn't he fix his own eyes? Yelmayong, the envoy from the Elder Council, had said he became blind due to burns. As a martial artist, he too would want to see, so why didn't he get eyes for himself? No matter how much he thought about it, it didn't make sense. Even if his lord wasn't interested in other people's affairs, this was strange enough to wonder about, yet he didn't mention it at all. Somehow, it felt like he was subtly changing from the person he used to know. Mo Yak, who had been staring at Na Yelriang as he downed another cup, finally opened his mouth. "What will you do about the Elder Council proposal?" "Proposal?" "Yes, they spoke as if they knew something." "Isn't that why you're considering it?" "Considering?" Glug glug glug. Na Yelriang raised an eyebrow as he filled his cup. The words of Yelmayong, the envoy from the Elder Council, flashed through his mind. "The society leader doesn't consider any of you young masters a successor." "What do you mean?" "I'm telling you because you might want to know." "I'm asking why you're telling me this now." This was at the time when rumors were spreading that the society leader's condition had worsened and he was on his deathbed. So why was he suddenly saying such things? Pack. Na Yelriang pressed his thumb against Yelmayong's vital point and spoke in a cold voice. "What is the Elder Council plotting?" "Plotting? That's an interesting way to put it. The Elder Council is just a place where retired members of the organization gather to spend their twilight years." "You seem to like retirement. Why are such old folks so interested in the organization's future, including the succession structure?" "Well, even if retired, it's because the organization's future depends on it." "The organization's future? How ridiculous. Isn't it because you want to grasp power again despite being retired?" "Are you talking about power? Do I need to spell it out?" Na Yelriang, who had been staring at the silent Yelmayong, finally released his hand from the vital point. Unlike others, perhaps because he had no eyes, it was impossible to read his emotions or thoughts. Na Yelriang spoke to him. "Tell those old folks. I don't mind if they support me, but tell them to stop going beyond that." "That might be a bit difficult." "What?" "As it happens, they have a proposal for you." "Proposal?" The situation has changed. A fourth person that no one knows about will be selected as the successor. If that happens, it will cause division in the organization." "A fourth person?" "Yes. So the Elder Council wants to recommend you as the society leader." At these words from Yelmayong, young Master Na Yelriang's expression became much colder than before. Even though he couldn't see Na Yelriang's expression, Yelmayong seemed to sense the change in the air and took half a step back with a light joke. "I'm surprised. I thought you didn't have much of a bond with the society leader." "That's none of your business. Loyalty to your master. Is that it?" "You." Swish. Suddenly, Yelmayong had moved 6 steps away from him. If he had been even a moment late, his throat would have been torn out for spouting nonsense. "If that's the case, I understand your anger, but please listen to what I have to say first." "Get lost. Please calm down. There's no more time." It's meaningless to regret later after losing your position. Even without your interference, that position cannot be yours. The reason the society leader hasn't decided on a successor even while on his sickbed is because he doesn't intend to give it to anyone. You still don't seem convinced. Then, do you know why the society leader has no children? Na Yelriang's cold gaze narrowed. He too wasn't particularly interested in women, so he had never specifically questioned this. Is it because he's not interested in women? Or because he's physically unable to have children? What are you trying to say? The society leader simply chose not to marry or have children. Because the heavenly vein no longer wants to be the society leader. Na Yelriang's eyebrow raised. What does he mean the heavenly vein no longer wants to be the society leader? Things were becoming confusing. Until now, he had thought the society leader's intention was for succession to happen through competition. So he hadn't had any particular complaints. Because none of the disciples could challenge his stronghold. But to hear that the society leader didn't consider anyone as a successor was bound to be irritating. Then why did he accept them as disciples in the first place? At that moment, Yelmayang said, "The Elder Council has two requirements. They are not requests that will harm you in any way. If you agree to them, you can become the society leader." After a moment of silence at these words, Na Yelriang asked, "What are the requirements?" "The first is to marry Miss Wai Soyan, your youngest fellow disciple, along with your inauguration as society leader." What? It was a completely unexpected demand. Marry Wai Soyan? To Na Yelriang, who was puzzled, Yelmayang smiled and said, "It's for legitimacy. If you become society leader, if disciples of the heavenly vein have children together, everyone will accept it as a substitute for the heavenly vein's flying house." It wasn't an unreasonable suggestion. What's the second one? That is. Na Yelriang's expression became strange at the Elder Council's second requirement that followed. This was a completely unexpected demand. Because of this, Na Yelriang had taken time to consider their proposal, saying he would think it over. Could their words be true? Or were they deliberately causing confusion to paint the picture they wanted? But Yelmayang's words hadn't been wrong at all. Apart from his illness getting worse, hadn't he continuously refused even private audiences? Did the society leader, no, his master, truly no longer want the heavenly vein to lead the organization? Tack. Na Yelriang emptied his cup and put it down on the table. It was then. Someone hurriedly ran to the rear garden where he had set up the drinking table. Despite running, his footsteps were barely audible, and his energy was so well concealed it was hardly noticeable. As soon as he saw him, Emoyak stood up and said, "It's the one we attached to Axe-destroying King. His body technique is unique. He's Silent Saber, from the 4 great assassins of the Central Plains, whom I introduced to you before. You said he was useful because of his unique energy concealing technique. His face is different. Is it a human skin mask? It must be. But why is he running here so frantically?" At Emoyak's question, the man who had run over caught his breath, put his hands together in respect, and said, "I had to deliver this urgently, so I came in a hurry." At his response, Emoyak clicked his tongue. Something seems to have gone wrong. We should probably give up on high expectations, young master. At these words, young master Na Yelriang snorted. He didn't have high expectations to begin with. He had already anticipated that Axe-destroying King Ho Tae-gang would try to implement a strategy of suffering a flesh wound. Even so, he thought he would take some action for that strategy, but judging from this man's reaction, it seemed Axe-destroying King hadn't moved as desired. So, did Axe-destroying King return from the Shadow Clan without doing anything? And no, that's not it. If that's not it, then what happened? Axe-destroying King was overwhelmed one-sidedly. At these words, Emoyak tilted his head. What does this mean? Axe-destroying King Ho Tae-gang was overwhelmed one-sidedly? Did he perhaps have an argument with his master, the Shadow Clan leader? As he wondered, Silent Saber Hyang-in continued in a serious voice. He tried to subdue someone called Mok Jiangun, but instead, in just a few moves, he suffered an injury with his arm broken and was forced to kneel. At these words, young master Na Yelriang, who was filling his cup, stopped. He had no choice but to stop. Who was axe-destroying King Ho Taegang? He was one of the 5 kings, who could be considered the highest officials of the Heaven and Earth Society, and a supreme master who had received the title of one of the 8 stars, a title held by only 2 people in the entire Heaven and Earth Society. And such a person had his arm broken and was forced to kneel in just a few moves? Mo Yak opened his mouth with an incredulous tone. Huh? Are you joking? And no, it's not a joke. It's true. Silent Saber Hyungin waved his hands. Even he couldn't believe the scene he had witnessed with his own eyes. Those who had received the title of one of the 8 stars were recognized as the supreme masters of the martial arts world, except for the 6 heavens who were called the pinnacle of the current martial world. But to see such a supreme master being toyed with by a young man who wasn't even of age was shocking in itself. Are you certain? It's true. And there was an incredibly powerful master in the Shadow Clan. He was able to find even me, who had completely concealed my presence and energy with the soundless technique. Wait. So besides the Watchers, you were also discovered? I apologize. So you hurriedly escaped and came here? Mo Yak's voice rose. Don't worry. I didn't come straight here. I took a detour and hid for a while to confirm if I was being tracked before coming. Huh. At these words, Mo Yak sighed and shook his head. The other Watchers were intentionally sent to make it obvious they were watching axe-destroying King, but not this man. He was someone who should never have been discovered from start to finish. But not only was he discovered, he had essentially fled. Mo Yak turned to young master Na Yelriang and said, Young master. Putting aside the veracity of the report for now. Are you certain? Pardon? That he subdued axe-destroying King in just a few moves. This question was directed not at Mo Yak, but at Silent Saber Hyungin. I can stake my life on it. Even axe-destroying King was no match for that person. It was as if his martial prowess was far higher. That's impossible. Mo Yak cut off his words. Then, looking at young master Na Yelriang, he said, As you said, young master, this Mok Jiangun was just at the early stage of the transformation realm before receiving the secret mission. But if Silent Saber's report is correct, this would only be possible if he had reached a realm beyond the Wall of Walls, on par with the bedridden society leader. No matter how monstrous his rate of development is, this is. Huh. At that moment, young master Na Yelriang let out a laugh as if in disbelief. Why is he acting like this? As they wondered, young master Na Yelriang suddenly burst into loud laughter. Ha 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 ha. At this sight, Mo Yak frowned. He had never shown such behavior before. But suddenly laughing like a madman, they couldn't understand what was going on. Finally, Na Yelriang stopped laughing, shook his head, and then downed his cup of alcohol. After drinking, Na Yelriang put down his cup and stood up. Young master? Until now, I thought no one could match me in martial talent, but it seems I was mistaken. Young master. Surely you don't believe Silent Saber's report. What if I do believe it? Do you think it's possible to deal with a peerless master who received the title of one of the 8 stars through trickery or deception in martial arts? At these words from Na Yelriang, Mo Yak took a deep breath and then exhaled. Then, calming himself, he opened his mouth. So you've judged that he has truly become strong, young master. It's not a judgment, it's a fact. He too had reached the extreme of the transformation realm through seclusion, and thanks to this demonic eye given by the Elder Council, he was slowly beginning to see beyond the Wall of Walls. If he utilized the power of the eye, he had even gained confidence that he might be able to defeat the Supreme Masters who had received the title of one of the 8 stars. The determination to face a worthy opponent that had appeared for the first time had made him this strong. But it seemed the guy had surpassed even his expectations. Did he encounter some fortuitous opportunity? It seemed he had encountered some fortuitous opportunity that allowed his martial prowess to rise dramatically while away from the organization on the secret mission. There was no other explanation. In fact, it wasn't very convincing. If it was certain that the guy had truly surpassed the wall of walls, it would show a tremendous growth unprecedented in martial arts history. For the first time, Na Yelriang experienced this kind of emotion. Is this jealousy? While being astounded by the guy's rapid, insane growth, for a moment, anger surged up. Perhaps this was what they called heaven-bestowed talent. After venting his emotions with loud laughter and momentarily escaping from jealousy, Na Yelriang quickly regained his composure. Then, Mo Yak. Yes. If we assume that he has reached the same realm as the society leader, what should we do from now on? If he's at the same realm as the society leader. Yes. I'm sorry to say, but no one has a chance in a one-on-one fight. I suppose so. If he had been given even a few more years, even one more year, perhaps he too could have trained like mad and somehow approached the wall of walls. But right now, he couldn't reach the same realm as that guy. Then the only answer was to deal with him in a different way. Mo Yak cautiously began to speak. If we mobilize all the forces we have, we might barely be able to face him. But now that we know his level, rather than not knowing, we can somehow find a way to. Chapter 392. Crossroads. Part 2. That's right. That's why I'm not going to give you time to find a way. A low voice echoed in his ear. Startled by this, Mo Yak, young master Na Yelriang's confidant, leaped forward without a moment to think. Pat. Simultaneously, he pulled out 2 daggers from both sleeves and, while doing a somersault, threw them towards the owner of the voice. Swish swish. Was it because he was extremely tense? It felt as if time was moving slowly. Even in the midst of his somersault, he could clearly see the face of that being. A face so beautiful. It seemed even more beautiful than a woman's. But that being slightly nodded his head as he looked at the incoming daggers. It seemed like he had no intention of blocking them. At that moment, pop hack. The flying daggers suddenly changed direction in midair, and then embedded themselves into Mo Yak's shoulder and thigh as he was mid-somersault. Puk. Puk. Ag. Ku dang tang. Mo Yak, hit by his own daggers, couldn't land properly and fell. This is. At this, Silent Saber Hyang-in, who was right beside him, hurriedly drew an extremely thin and flexible sword from his waist and tried to behead that being, Mok Jiang-un, who had suddenly appeared. However, before it could even reach him, Chang Gang. The sword broke and flew upwards. Pack. Kek. Silent Saber Hyang-in's neck was caught in Mok Jiang-un's hand as he was swinging his sword. It happened so quickly that Silent Saber Hyang-in couldn't even perceive what had been done. As he was bewildered. So you're that rat who was sneaking peeks earlier. Kek kek. You? If you're done with your business, shall we go? Ji go, you say? Kwa duk. Mok Jiang-un tore out Hyang-in's Adam's apple as he questioned. Hyang-in, with blood pouring from where his Adam's apple had been torn out, staggered with eyes wide open before falling backwards and sprawling out. The sight of him twitching with blood gushing up was almost pitiful. Despite 2 people being taken down in an instant, young master Na Yelriang's eyes never left Mok Jiang-un. He glanced up once with his eyes and then opened his mouth. Did you come by flying? Yes, you guessed correctly. Came by flying, he says. Does that mean he used something like sky-traversing void path or void stepping? Even he, who had mastered the clear and manifest water-crossing steps, one of the greatest body techniques in history, and was more skilled in footwork than anyone, had not yet reached that level. He tried to deny it inwardly, but still, he has surpassed the wall of walls. If it came down to pure martial arts, he had to admit he had no chance of winning. And the guy's aura had changed. Even before, starting from his almost deluded emotions, he had thought him to be a similar type of person to himself in many ways, so he thought that if he wouldn't follow, he should naturally be killed. But apart from this, there had been an immature feeling, but now that was completely gone. If before he had been rough and unrefined, now he felt like a well-forged sword, complete. Became stronger. Na Yelriang's pupils moved minutely but continuously. Though he knew Mok Jiangyun had become overwhelmingly strong, being in an opposing situation, he was imagining countless scenarios of confrontation in his mind. But even after envisioning dozens, hundreds of times in an instant, no answer came. The guy had completely become a monster. Drip. Feeling something strange on his forehead, Na Yelriang wiped it with the back of his hand. It was cold sweat. Seeing this, a strange light flickered in Na Yelriang's eyes. Had he ever shed such sweat besides when training? It was the first time in his life he had felt tense about something. Life and death. Am I standing at that crossroads? Crossroads. What an interesting crossroads. A crossroads riddled with death where the path to life was barely visible. To him, Mok Jiangyun said, I wanted to see you become more emotional, but since you're a rational person, it seems reality has sunk in quickly. Since I don't see any chance of winning, I won't particularly deny it. I'll give you a choice. A choice? Yes. I suppose you're going to give me unnecessary hope torture. Consider it a chance to enjoy life a bit longer. What is this choice you speak of? If you sever the tendons and muscles of your limbs and destroy your Danjian yourself, I'll let you keep your life. Is that much different from telling a martial artist to die? If death as a martial artist is the same as life to you, you can die right here. Huh. Na Yelriang snorted. At his reaction, Mok Jiangyun shrugged. Then Na Yelriang reached out somewhere. The scabbard lying next to the drinking table was sucked into his hand by Boyd grasping. Tack. Na Yelriang, grasping the scabbard, opened his mouth. I have no intention of begging for my life so pitifully or living like that. But if I'm going anyway, it's not bad to go as a martial artist. How admirable. Cut the insincere talk. Anyway, beyond the martial arts world, the world is about the strong eating the weak. It's the law of nature that the weak are eliminated, and this time it was just me. Though he said this, it was truly a bitter moment. It's almost laughable that even though he had gained power nearly on par with the 8 stars, he had become the weak one thanks to the guy becoming even stronger. Na Yelriang, tightly gripping the sword hilt with his right hand, was about to remove the eye patch he was wearing. Even in a fight with no chance of winning, shouldn't one struggle? Mok Jiangyun also moved to grasp his sword-deciding talisman. It was then. Time stopped darkness. Suit suck. As if blinking, the world briefly darkened. Along with this, Mok Jiangyun's eyes narrowed. This was because young master Na Yelriang, who had been right in front of him just a moment ago, had disappeared. What on earth was going on? It happened in such a brief instant that he was puzzled. There was no movement of presence, no flow of energy, yet not only had he disappeared from sight midway. Rumble, rumble, rumble. He felt numerous presences converging around him. And there were a great many of them. These two had appeared as if suddenly generated. It was a strange phenomenon. At this, Mok Jiangyun slowly raised his head and looked at someone sitting on the roof tiles of the pavilion in the rear garden. Was this your doing? Oh? I thought you'd be quite flustered no matter how strong you are, but to maintain such coolness in this situation. Truly impressive. The person sitting on the pavilion roof tiles at a distance. It was Yelmayong, the envoy from the Elder Council. Seeing Yelmayong's face full of horrible burn scars, Mok Jiangyun immediately recognized him as the one who had tried to track him with mystical techniques. How was he here, with young master Na Yelriang suddenly disappearing? The reason was... Swish. The demonic power of the third eye opened in Mok Jiangyun's pupils. Then he felt an immeasurably enormous spiritual power around him. It had shaken the very space itself, and the surrounding flow was still unstable. Observing this, Mok Jiangyun opened his mouth. What kind of mystical technique is this? At this question, the brow of Yelmayong, the envoy from the Elder Council, twitched. He had a feeling it might be the case. But had he read the remaining waves of spiritual power? The secret records left by Primal Killing Pavilion leader in Cook said that Bangwol Jo Uigong was accepted as a disciple due to his outstanding talent, and it seems that was true. At these words, Mok Jiangun, seemingly unconcerned, continued his own words. This level of spiritual power seems impossible for even an outstanding diviner to possess. Did you borrow the power of a ritual tool or some special medium? Huh? It seems I'm right. Did you just temporarily stop me alone? At this question, the mouth of Yelmayong, the envoy from the Elder Council, opened slightly. He seemed somewhat surprised. Yelmayong, who had opened his mouth and furrowed his brow, then said, "What on earth are you? How did you?" The bloodstains on the ground are towards the direction outside the pavilion, but they clearly didn't move while fallen. Isn't it strange that they left that and disappeared from there? Blood? In the direction Mok Jiangun was looking, there were a few very faint drops of blood remaining. It seemed they had erased most traces, but had missed this one. If Yelmayong's eyes could see, he would have been very surprised at this. Because he had immediately found a trace that was so difficult to find. And for so many people to approach this close without me sensing even a hint of their presence, it's only possible if I alone was somehow separated and suddenly dropped here. Ah. Perhaps you temporarily separated me with some special technique? No, not just from space, but even from the flow of time? At this question, Yelmayong was truly dumbfounded. For a moment, he felt chills all over his body. He might be able to sense spiritual power because he had learned mystical arts, but this insight was terrifying. He had figured out the use of the divine artifact Time Stop Darkness from just part of the situation. Time Stop Darkness was one of the few remaining divine artifacts from the era of the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors, a treasure that could only be used when spiritual power accumulated naturally. However, the conditions for this divine artifact were quite strict compared to other divine artifacts. For instance, once used, all spiritual power was consumed and had to be gathered again, and only 1,000th of the accumulated spiritual power was actually manifested. If spiritual power accumulated for 1,000 years, it could completely separate the desired target from the world space and time for 1 year, 1,000th of that time. It was absolute enough to be called a divine artifact, so no being could escape from it. What on earth is this guy? No matter how much he had learned mystical arts, no matter how strong his insight was, this was beyond common sense, so it was extremely difficult to deduce in an instant. Yet he had accurately grasped what the divine artifact had done in such a short moment. What a monstrous guy. Yelmayong, the envoy from the Elder Council, truly clicked his tongue. Because he had been using the divine artifact whenever necessary, he hadn't gathered much spiritual power and could only confine him for half a quarter hour. However, because he was confined for such a short time, it should have been even more difficult to grasp the situation, yet this guy was truly unbelievable. While surprised, Yelmayong felt somewhat regretful inwardly. To only now discover such a person. He had heard that he wasn't even of age yet, but with martial arts that had surpassed the wall of walls and even such talent in mystical arts, he was a talent anyone would covet. At this, Yelmayong, with a hopeful heart, opened his mouth. You're truly intelligent. I don't think I've ever seen anyone as clever as you among all the people I've met. I'll take that as a compliment. So, I was wondering. If it's persuasion, I'll decline. More importantly, where did you send the young master? To refuse even before he could speak. He hadn't had high expectations to begin with, but this guy was truly resolute. It seemed persuasion would really be difficult. At this, Yelmayong, the envoy from the Elder Council, shook his head and opened his mouth. Do you think I'd simply tell you that? At these words, Mok Jiangun chuckled and replied, well, who knows? When your life is in imminent danger, your mouth might reveal where the young master went. Gruel. Mok Jiangun intentionally revealed his killing intent. This was a clear threat. Despite this, Yulmayong spoke nonchalantly, as if joking, "My, how scary." "Well, but that would be difficult. The young master is a very important existence to us, you see." "Is that so? Then I'll have to find him myself." Judging from the remaining blood traces, he hadn't been confined for too long. If so, there was still plenty of room to track him. There was no need to face all the people surrounding this place, it would be enough to just deal with this guy and go. It was at that moment. Pack. Someone appeared and stood on top of the east wall. That someone was an old man with white hair and sharp features, and in his hand was a familiar face held by the nape of the neck. It was Mok Yucheon? It was Mok Yucheon, his half-brother who had been taken hostage along with him at the Yun Mok Sword Manor. Of course, to be precise, he was the real Mok Jaeongun's half-brother. There were signs of injury on his face, as if he had been forcibly captured. Clap clap clap. Yulmayong clapped his hands and said with a raised corner of his mouth, "You've arrived just in time." At these words, the white-haired old man snorted and said, pressing down on Mok Yucheon's neck, "To bring such a guy in just half a quarter hour, you're really troubling this old body." I'm still grateful nonetheless. In any case, swish. Tack. Yulmayong came down from the roof tile he was sitting on, and continued speaking to Mok Jaeongun with a sneer. "Now the situation is reversed. With that clever head of yours, why don't you try to guess what I'm going to say? Just kill him." Chapter 393. Crossroads. Part 3. Now the situation is reversed. With that clever head of yours, why don't you try to guess what I'm going to say? Just kill him. The expression of Yulmayong, the envoy from the Elder Council, hardened. What did he just hear? Kill him? Mok Jaeongun. That younger brother is your. I said, kill him. At these resolute words, not only Yulmayong but even the white-haired old man who had brought Mok Yucheon couldn't hide their bewilderment. They clearly knew these two were brothers who had been taken hostage together. That's why they thought he would be a good card to restrain Mok Jaeongun. But what on earth was this guy? Is it a bluff? But to say that. There wasn't even a hint of hesitation. There wasn't even a tremor in his voice. It was so dumbfounding, as if they were complete strangers. No. Even if they don't get along, there can't be someone who wants their own flesh and blood to die. He must be controlling his emotions extremely well. If his enlightenment was high enough to have reached the realm of manifestation after surpassing the wall of walls, as young Master Na Yelriang said, he should be able to easily control his own emotions. Then it was just a matter of testing him. Swish. Yulmayong raised his hand and gave a hand signal. At this, the white-haired old man sighed and pressed down on Mok Yucheon's left shoulder. Grip. Kook. You're suffering unnecessary harm due to your brother's stubbornness. Brother, what? I clearly, Kook, told you he wouldn't even blink. Mok Yucheon had already been told that he would be used as a card to threaten Mok Jaeongun while being captured. To this, Mok Yucheon had snorted and said it absolutely wouldn't work. That guy was literally a demon. If he had considered him a brother, he would never have done such things in the Corpse Blood Valley. Grip. Koop. Mok Yucheon's groans grew louder at the pain that felt like his shoulder was being torn off. Then Yulmayong said to Mok Jaeongun, "Let's see if you still say to kill him when your brother's shoulder is being torn off." Swish. Before his words could finish, Mok Jaeongun's form appeared in front of him in an instant. As he appeared, Mok Jaeongun's hand moved to grab Yulmayong's neck in one go. Pat. At that moment, Yulmayong hurriedly threw his body backward, and something invisible and unknown created a repulsive force in front of Mok Jaeongun as he tried to follow. Paong. This is? With an incredibly heavy force, Mok Jaeongun's form was pushed back about 5 steps in an instant. Yulmayong raised his voice at him. So it was a bluff after all. Do you think you can safely retrieve your brother by taking me hostage? I told you I don't care whether you kill him or not. Do you think I'd believe that? Elder Kong. Just tear off his left shoulder. As you wish. Quack. The white-haired old man called Elder Kong immediately drove his fingers into Mok Yuchion's shoulder. However, he didn't do it in one go. Since it was meant to threaten and control the opponent's actions by using a hostage, he deliberately pushed his fingers in slowly. But at that very moment. As expected, if you do that. Wu Jik. Wu Ji Jik. Mok Yuchion's shoulder muscles began to twitch, and then blood vessels bulged on his facial skin as his body started to swell. Startled by the sudden change, Elder Kong tried to tear off Mok Yuchion's shoulder, thinking oh no. However, Mok Yuchion grabbed his wrist. Hack. And broke it right there. Crack. Kook. You bastard. Elder Kong, with his wrist broken, tried to pierce Mok Yuchion's neck in one go by raising energy in his other hand. However, before he could do so, Mok Yuchion threw his body forward and avoided it. After dodging like that, Mok Yuchion turned his head to look at Elder Kong as if to check on him, but flinch. Elder Kong hesitated for a moment and felt creeped out by the sight of blood vessels bulging all over his face, his eyes completely red, and his skin turned black and grotesque. At that moment, Yul Myong, the envoy from the Elder Council, shouted. What's this? Did you let him go? This bastard was hiding a strange energy circulation technique. Elder Kong had felt the energy suddenly reverse while holding his shoulder. Such a reversal was an extremely dangerous energy circulation technique that could lead to chi deviation. Just looking at his current appearance was enough to confirm this. His internal energy has exploded. In an instant, he had surpassed himself. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that in terms of internal energy alone, he had almost reached the peak of the transcendent realm. However, this must be temporary due to that dangerous energy circulation technique, so it's not a state that can be maintained for long. Chong. I need to subdue him first. Elder Kong drew his sword and flew towards Mok Yuchion. However, pat. Instead of blocking Elder Kang's sword, Mok Yuchion flew his body towards an unexpected person. It was Mok Jiangun. The momentum with which he flew his body looked almost like an attack. As they were thinking surely not. Pop-hack. Mok Yuchion, raising energy in his hand, unleashed the third move of Bright Blade King's unique sword technique, the Bright Sun Sword Technique, one Sun Sword Return, towards Mok Jiangun with tremendous internal energy. The momentum of the move was incredibly domineering, as if he truly intended to kill his opponent. I was a fool for harboring even a sliver of hope. In truth, Mok Yuchion could have avoided being captured using the reverse blood energy circulation technique. However, he wanted to use this opportunity to test one last time whether Mok Jiangun truly considered him as flesh and blood. If he had shown even a slight hesitation, no matter how demonic he was, Mok Yuchion would have thought he was human after all. But now, he had no hope or lingering attachment left. You were going to abandon me too, so I'll defeat you here and cut off all ties of blood and kinship. With that, Mok Yuchion's sword energy, at its peak due to the reverse blood energy circulation technique, rushed mercilessly towards Mok Jiangun. However, Chaong. Mok Jiangun casually caught Mok Yuchion's sword energy with his bare hand. The domineering aura and internal energy in the sword move were no exaggeration to say they had reached the peak of the transcendent realm. But what on earth was this? As he was bewildered, Mok Jiangun said, "Why did you attack me? You. How?" When they had fought before, they were almost evenly matched thanks to the reverse blood energy circulation technique. But what was this now? Paroo-roo-roo. Crack. Crack. Even though he had raised his reverse blood energy to tenfold, his hand didn't budge at all. How could he withstand his sword energy, which was close to strong chi, with his bare hand without even raising any special energy? To the puzzled Mok Yuchion, Mok Jiangun said, "Looking at your eyes, your mind hasn't been consumed. You've improved somewhat too." Improved? You. If you attacked because you were upset about me saying to kill you, I'll let it slide this once. What? Stop being a nuisance and just go. Puk. Hyuk. As soon as he finished speaking, Mok Jaeyoungun's fist struck Mok Yucheon's abdomen. It didn't seem like he had swung hard, but just lightly hit him, yet Mok Yucheon's body bent like a shrimp and was sent flying backward. Kwa 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 kwang. He even flew through a wall about 10 zhang away. After breaking through the wall and rolling several times, Mok Yucheon finally came to a stop. You. Sprawled out, Mok Yucheon was truly dumbfounded. He had devoted himself madly to martial arts training with the sole intention of paying back that guy for what happened then. But what was this? Far from being a match for that guy, his internal organs were shaken by a light punch. As blood rose in his throat, he couldn't maintain the reverse blood energy circulation technique, and his body was gradually returning to its original state. Damn it. Kwang. Mok Yucheon's eyes reddened as he slammed his fist on the ground. After all that hardship, that guy had become so strong that he felt like not just a youngster, but lower than an insect on the ground compared to him. It felt so unfair. Meanwhile, Yalmayong, the envoy from the Elder Council, inwardly clicked his tongue at the sight of Mok Yucheon being sent flying after receiving a single punch from Mok Jaeyoungun when he had rushed at him. He had thought he could use him as a card to control Mok Jaeyoungun because they were blood relatives, but at this rate, it seemed they were almost worse than enemies. A completely useless card. Then there was no choice. Since the hostage play had become useless, now there were only two options left. Those surrounding this place now were a group of masters secretly nurtured by the Elder Council, and high-level masters of great commander rank and above that young master Na Yelriang had persuaded, along with their subordinate forces. There were 10 Transcendent Realm masters, at least 50 people at the Peak Realm or above, and nearly 400 first-class master-level forces that could be scraped together. If there had been more time, they would have gathered more forces, but this was the limit for half a quarter hour. Of course, this alone could be considered a tremendous force, but if the opponent was truly a Grand Master who had surpassed the wall of walls and reached the level of the 6 heavens, this wouldn't be enough. Therefore, the best prepared force could be said to be himself. Swish! Yalmayong formed a hand seal with one hand and opened his mouth. Since the hostage play has become meaningless, it seems we have no choice but to shed blood. I truly hoped a young man like you would join us. That won't happen. And Mok Jaeyoungun's eyes were directed towards the front of Yalmayong, or more precisely, towards a transparent being emitting a faint demonic energy. Seeing Mok Jaeyoungun's gaze, Yalmayong clicked his tongue. Truly remarkable talent. If we had met a little earlier, I would have wanted to take you as a disciple, as a diviner. He meant it sincerely. This faint demonic being protecting him was an evil spirit exceptionally skilled at concealing its appearance, which couldn't be detected even by moon-level spiritual power. At least some level or above was needed to perceive it, but this guy who wasn't even of age possessed extraordinary qualities. I've heard that a lot. All the diviners from Primal Killing Pavilion said the same thing before they died. Before they died? Wait. You don't mean? They dared to kill my spirit servant and even try to track me. At these words, Yalmayong's ears perked up. He had thought that since the one controlling in Seook, the Primal Killing Pavilion leader who had been turned into a living corpse spirit, was a diviner from Harmonious Immortal Pavilion, naturally the Red Eyebrow Old Immortal, one of the 6 divine practitioners, must be behind it. He had thought no one else could deflect his tracking technique. But this guy deflected my tracking technique? Yalmayong was truly shocked. A mere youngster who wasn't even of age, let alone holding the title of divine practitioner, had deflected his tracking technique. What kind of guy was this? His martial arts were on par with the 6 heavens, the pinnacle of the current martial world, and his spiritual power as a diviner had also reached the divine practitioner level? To the astonished Yalmayong, Mok Jaeyoungun grasped the hilt of the demonic sword, Evil Commandment sword, and said, "So I was determined to kill you if I ever saw you, and how fortunate." You've appeared before me on your own feet. Kill me? Ha! To him who scoffed, Mok Jiangun smiled faintly and said, You shouldn't rely too much on that invisible spirit servant. PFT. At these words, Yao Mayong let out a sneer. Mok Jiangun, not minding his reaction at all, half drew evil commandment sword. Surung. Then Yao Mayong stopped sneering and said, It's the first time my face has been so disgraced since receiving the title of divine practitioner. Well then. Divine practitioner? Did he just call himself a divine practitioner? As Mok Jiangun wondered, Yao Mayong formed a hand seal with one hand. Chuck. 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 Lim. Bayong. Gi. Jin. Waruru Ryuk. At that moment, balls of fire began to fall from the air like hail. Kung. 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 Even Elder Kong, who was on the same side as him, widened his eyes at this strange sight. What on earth was this bizarre phenomenon? Then Yao Mayong opened his mouth in a meaningful voice. I am Mayong Riel, the Grand Divination Master of the Golden Origin Pavilion. One of the 6 divine practitioners, the first to take a spiritual beast, the highest rank among evil spirits, as a spirit servant. Qua a. As soon as he finished speaking, a huge white being that hadn't been visible before revealed itself and let out a roar so loud it shook the surroundings.